Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Also on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I've got 4 other podcasts: The Meditation, The Awakening, Learn Polish, and The Crypto, as well as being a podcasting coach. And you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. Today, looking forward to this episode. We've got the CEO and co-founder of Stream Alive. He's a TED speaker. He's also an author and done a few other things as well. Please welcome Lux Narayan.
Perfect.
Really?
Thank you, Roy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Well, I know that you've listened to a few of the shows. I've mentioned a few of the things you're doing, but you might introduce yourself to the listeners.
Cool. I'll maybe go in the sequence you mentioned. So my, what I do for my day job and really my life at this point is my newest baby, which is streamalive.com. And Stream Alive was born from a previous journey, and we'll talk more about Stream Alive, I'm sure, about how we help make live streams alive. And that's one of the reasons I was particularly excited about coming on to your show, because it's about speaking and it's about speakers, and Stream Alive is very, very complementary to that. I like dabbling in a lot of things at any given point in time. You could call it an extended midlife crisis. So my current passion, which I've been following for the last few years, has been stand-up comedy. Scariest thing I've done, speaking to a bunch of strangers and trying to make them laugh. But as you probably guessed, I enjoy speaking. So speaking at the TED main stage here in New York City on Obituaries was something I enjoyed preparing for, and something I enjoyed delivering as well. Writing is a big passion. So I know you can't see it on the podcast, but this was a passion project during the pandemic. More than a passion project, actually. It's a book called Name, Place, Animal Thing. And it's funny how things happen, because Stream Alive was actually born from that book writing journey. And if that's of interest, happy to dive into that story as well. But that's me in a nutshell.
No, to be honest with you, everything you mentioned there, I want to touch into. So I have done an open mic, and I've also done with the Toastmasters. I've done a lot of competitions, and I enjoy the comedy. I've watched one of your comedies, and it was actually very good. There's a lot of kind of playing with words and callbacks and everything that you were doing. So how long have you been doing the comedy, and why did you actually start it?
So I've been doing, a fan of comedy for, I can't remember how long. And I think a lot of us are big fans of comedy, right? Since I'm close to New York City, I had the benefit of signing up for a class about 6 years ago in improv comedy, which is fantastic because it's totally unscripted. It's totally based on audience inputs. It's totally thinking in the moment. It's totally yes-anding your colleagues and your friends and working with them instead of the classic no but, right? So you're saying yes and adding on to that. So it was a beautiful philosophy to work with and take back to the workplace. So at that point, I was running a company called Unmetric that I previously co-founded. It got acquired about 3 years ago. So that was great culture to take back to the company. And then I enjoyed improv so much that I actually picked up the courage to I think it was over a couple of beers and losing a bet with a friend at some point that I said, maybe I'll try stand-up comedy as well. And the funny thing there was, I realized how much of structure there is to comedy. So stand-up comedy was as much as, you write your script, and the end of it, you calculate the number of jokes. And if you don't have a joke every 20 seconds, your script sucks. So you had to have at least 3 jokes a minute. So a 5 minute set, you need at least 15 jokes. Anything less than that, it's not a comedy set. And then callbacks and the science of it, and how you structure a joke, and how you kind of get economical with words. How do you quickly get an audience to come on to a premise? It was probably the toughest speaking thing I'd ever done. And I just fell in love with it. I think the bigger side benefit was it made me a lot more observational, because after I signed up for stand-up comedy and did a set, I was suddenly hunting for material everywhere. Earlier I'd go to an airport, and you might go to the lounge and sit there, or you'll just be buried in your laptop or your phone. And now I don't do any of those things. I'll be sitting in a chair, or sitting at a bar or sitting at a coffee shop and just looking around me at all the stories that are happening with so many travelers walking around and this ample comedy material out there. And I just find I'm looking more often for things, and I think that's a good frame of mind to be in. So I could go on and on about comedy,
No,
but this is
I
not the
just
comedy podcast, so
no,
I'll not
no,
go
and I'm
there.
just curious because what I've noticed is when I went through, say, a competition, it was you kind of allow the laughter element because sometimes it's the same when you're doing a stand-up. You might get 5 minutes, and sometimes they're fairly harsh because they've got, say, 10 or whatever amount of things. But you have to allow for the laughing before you start going again. And I found the more the crowd, the more you have to allow for the actual laughter. Have you experienced the same?
Oh, totally. And it works both ways, right? You practice your script and you expect laughter at certain points. You expect more laughter at a certain point, and you expect less laughter for a slight chuckle when you do a callback and things. And sometimes it goes per the script where the audience laughs as you expected them, but at times it doesn't. So you have this joke that you think totally crushed it, and you get some polite laughter, and then at that point it's important not to pause too long but move on quickly, right? And then you got this other one that you thought was a very ordinary pedestrian joke, but people are rolling with laughter. At which point, I think the stupidest thing you could do is actually continue talking. And that is one of the things we learned. When people are laughing, just shut up. Just
Exactly.
shut up, listen, enjoy the laughter with them. If something comes up spontaneously, do it with them. But that was beautiful because you're not just relaying a script; you're actually part of the crowd, right? You're laughing with them, and just adapting those things. It doesn't come naturally because you're like in school mode, right? When you do your first set, you got this thing that you got to deliver and you want to get it over with. But then you start enjoying it. And when you start enjoying it, you learn to laugh with the audience, you learn to pause, you learn to riff a little bit. And that's when it starts getting even more interesting. But yes, absolutely. That those pauses and I think you know about it because I mean, one is you're on a speaking podcast, and you said you also done some open mics. Unless you actually been on stage and done that, the importance of those pauses is not something that comes naturally.
Yeah, and what you've mentioned, that's happened to me a lot of times. I'd assume, okay, they're gonna crack up laughing with this, and yeah, they might get a few giggles, and it's the opposite, and you're gonna, yeah. But I think when you're playing from flow and you're not too scripted, and you're just, you know exactly what way you're going to go, you just go with it, and it doesn't affect you. Where some people, they're so scripted that they can't do that.
Absolutely, and I think you those three words you said is captures it: playing with flow, right? So you're playing from flow with flow. That's when you're kind of in the same stream as the audience, and I think that's super important.
No, exactly. So now I'd like to delve on the TED speech that you've done because I know you've done a lot of research on it, and we call it looking up the debt column. And but it's got something like over two. I know it's in a few different places, so it's hard for me. But I'm sure it's over nearly 2 million or 2 million plus views on it, which is very impressive.
Thank you, and I mean that is very close to my heart because the obituaries and over here in the states where I am, the New York Times is my newspaper of choice, and over there they have a fantastic obituary column. Um, in terms of actually, let's take a step back, right? But when I was growing up, I heard this fantastic expression that stuck with me, which is, if you want to learn about man's failures, read the newspaper from the first page onwards. And think about it. Right? In the first page, you're going to read about war, you're going to read about the virus, you're going to read about politics, you're going to read about accidents and crime and terrorism, and all of those things are the first things you read about in the newspaper on the first page. It's usually pretty depressing. The obituaries, which traditionally in most newspapers are on the back of the newspaper, this was before newspapers started coming out with about 20 different sections. The obituaries would be right at the end, and very very fittingly, I would say, right at the end. But when you read the obituaries, they're a celebration of lives well led. They're a celebration of amazing things that people did. I mean, some of them might be notorious things as well, but all of those together paint a beautiful kaleidoscope of what life is about, right? And each of us is so much in our own bubble that I just find the obituaries are a great way to look at What else is out there? What else are people remembered for? What are the amazing things people did in their lives and are remembered for afterwards? Is the highest form of accolade, if you ask me, because here you are mentioned in a newspaper like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Economist in the obituary section, but you can't post it on Facebook because you're not there anymore, right? So it's pretty ironical in some ways. So I've been fascinated by the obituaries. I have a stack out here on the side, which is about a dozen from the last week. It's still constant reading for me. So at that time, I used to do a lot of speaking, and I spoke at this was because I used to run a company called Unmetric in the social media intelligence space. We would help brands benchmark what they were doing on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Instagram, and we did that for 150,000 brands across the world. And I was talking about big data and stuff at a Twitter conference, and I said, who wants to listen so much about data? So let's make it fun, let's make it interesting, and that's why the comedy hat comes in. So I gave a talk about data that had a joke every 30 seconds or so. So there's someone in the audience who enjoyed it and said, if you can do a similar thing, which is I run TEDx in Bombay, and I'd love to have you there. And he said, if you have something interesting to talk about. So at some point, I'll spare you the details of how we stumbled upon that, but it took a few tries. I thought this would be a great story because my life at that point was looking at historical data from a data perspective. I said, why not do it from a life and death perspective by doing it in the obituaries? What lessons can we learn from them, right? So we analyzed 2,000 obituaries, looked at lessons from that, and that's really what we synthesized into that TEDx speech. And the interesting thing was the curator for TED Worldwide was in the audience at that point, and she loved the talk. And then I was invited to speak on the TED stage over here, and I think that's the one you saw, which got about 2 million views. But fantastic experience just from the learning to speak, from the number of rehearsals you need to do, from how prepared you get. I hit a point where you could wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask me to recite the speech, and I could do it entirely from memory. But I think TED is a great, training ground for a certain structure of speech and a certain delivery way of speech, and that was one of the ancillary benefits. Besides working on what I personally think is pretty amazing content. I mean, learning from obituaries.
No, absolutely, absolutely, so it's because I've seen kind of one where it was like 5 odd minutes and another so over 10. So was it that one is from the Bombay and the other's the TED one then on the yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So I think one is 7 minutes and one is about 12 minutes. The Bombay one, they publish a longer one. The one in New York at the TED HQ was a tighter one. I think we had about 10 speakers that day within a span of about an hour or two or something. So yeah, two different formats.
And through your journey, say the TED, because I mean, a lot of people have done. There's very few, that get to actually do the TED one. But I mean, that you've done the journey and you were kind of constantly learning. Any tips you would give people that you kind of, as you got to the stage, because you said you wake up at 3 in the morning and you could recite it. Like, was there anything that when the penny dropped and went, oh, that has made a difference that you incorporate into future speaking?
It's something which now is very, very obvious in retrospect, because when you're speaking, you focus so much on the speaking part that you forget the writing part of it. So starting with the writing, and I think after that, one of the big things I did was focusing on writing. After I just realized comedy is about writing. TED is about writing. It's about communicating a bunch of ideas in the most economical sense possible in terms of using the minimum number of words. So we're so used to, in conversation, expanding, belaboring, using much more words than we really need to, but in a tight five, as they call it in comedy, or in a 7 minute time on stage that you have in TED, you need to collapse and condense as many of your ideas as possible into that time constraint. So the first thing it teaches you is how to write better. Right? Like I said, in the comedy sense, it is how do you write to have a joke every 20 seconds. In the TED sense, it is like how do you communicate as many ideas as possible within it, where you got to strike a delicate balance. You don't want to make it too rich where people are losing you and not with you. and you don't want to belabor it too much, where people are like, okay, he just said that a minute ago, let me check my phone now. So striking the delicate balance starts off with writing, and once you've got that nailed down, which is voiceless, without intonation, without expression, after that is when the emoting and the expressions and all of that comes. And then the next stage is what we talked about a little while back, where although it's a speech, you're not really giving the audience time to react. You are giving them time to react in terms of smiling, nodding their heads, or chuckling, or laughing in case of stand-up comedy, right? And you probably noticed, if you saw that TED speech, that although it's a talk about obituaries, there are a fair number of jokes. So now it's become where I can't help it. I cannot give a speech without cracking jokes. It's kind of become part of my DNA, and something I thoroughly enjoy. Um,
And
but
I think people connect with you better when you're doing that, because if you make them laugh, there's like a bond straight away.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And it's like a Jedi trick, right? I mean, you're talking across to somebody, and you're actually making their stomach and their throat vibrate without doing anything, without touching them. It's a magic trick, if you ask me, right? Laughing is such a basic emotion that eliciting it is, I think, powerful and very, very strong in terms of the bonds that it creates. Right? It's probably rooted in a primal sense. You cannot be thinking of killing someone or attacking someone when you're laughing. So therefore, it's also a sense of a very relaxed state of mind that people are in. For me, it's just an obsession and a love for comedy. But to paraphrase, in answer to your question, it's the focus on the writing, and then the intonation and delivery, and finally, don't forget to actually enjoy, digest, and actually swim in those pauses, because that's where you're having a conversation with your audience through their laughs, through their smiles, through their eyes, through their facial expressions, through their hair expressions, which is nodding this way if you're here in the West, or nodding this way if you're in India. But all of that, yes.
Oh, brilliant. So I know with your book that we mentioned at the start, and I've seen some of the things kind of, I don't know that they come from this, but I actually hate that question as well. So what do you do?
It's to answer, right? But it's a um and ironically, we haven't heard that question. So what do you do, very often in the last couple of years through the pandemic, because you didn't have the chance to meet someone accidentally at a bar or a coffee shop, or at some other place, or at a conference or an event, which is typically where you'd ask an absolute stranger this question. And then the person would respond with what it says in their most recent profile update on their LinkedIn page, which might be what they do for 50% of the time that they are awake, but it certainly doesn't define all of us as people. I mean, look at your introduction to this podcast when you started off. You have a podcast on mindfulness, you have one on this, you have one on crypto, you have one on the Polish language. We were talking about Ireland a little while back. We're talking about you being in Poland. There's so many dimensions to us that it would be criminal almost to just compartmentalize a person into that one thing they do for earning their monthly salary. Right? So it's been a pet peeve of mine that we need to be defined by a lot more things. So that's why the book Name Place Animal thing is also a childhood game. So I'm a big fan of analogies and metaphors. So the game is an analogy for the entire book. And spoiler alert, the gist of the book is it's like make more things, physical and virtual. Virtual stuff like a podcast, but also physical things with your hands. Get in touch with your inner animal. I'm sure you'll relate to it in terms of mindfulness and your body and your breath and all of those things. Places travel not just far and wide. It's enough to travel near and narrow, because there's so many things in your backyard that you probably have never seen and should probably start with first, since they're very cheap to visit. And finally, name, which is there's more names to us than what we wear for our job and that side of our identity, right? So the book is written, it's a non-fiction book, but it's written in the style of fiction. So if you're familiar with Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, or Jonathan Livingston Seagull, or all those allegory kind of books where there's a story, which is almost like the vehicle that carries a whole bunch of ideas, so it doesn't become too preachy or too didactic. It was very cathartic for me to write the book. It's been in my head for a very long time, and interestingly, it came at a very difficult time in life, but also almost like regeneration. The current company, Stream Alive, was born from the book writing journey. So I can't thank the book enough.
And like, because I love marketing, and I just the cover. Because if I'm walking in a shop, that would grab my attention because you've got the four colors big along with the picture. So definitely you've nailed it on the head with the cover. And did you self-publish or have you gone with a publisher?
I self-published it, but used a publishing company's facilities to do it, just to make life a little easier for me. So it was one publishing company in India and one for the rest of the world. I just used Amazon, which was entirely self-published. But for India, I used because there it's a little more resonant, since the game is something that people in India are a little more familiar with. So I had a company called Notion Press, which also works with a lot of self-publishers work on it.
Okay, excellent. So let's move into the goal, the stream alive, and it's something I'm very interested in because I do a lot of live streaming, usually every Tuesday and Thursday, but we've taken a month or two off for the summer. But I've done, I don't know, 50 more, which a lot of, Mickey Willis, David Icke, a lot of famous people in America, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and I know the exposure you get is fantastic. So you mentioned that it came from the book, so you might tell me the journey of it.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, let me rewind back a bit. I told you I was previously running a company called Unmetric. Unmetric got acquired in the end of 2019. And then after that, we had a personal emergency at home with our older son having a medical emergency in Berlin, having to be airlifted here, and life just got very, very crazy. And we thought that's the craziest thing that can happen, and it was. And then the whole world goes into lockdown with COVID. So just too many things happening at the same time. I just decided I needed a break. So in the middle of 2020, I left the company that I had co-founded about almost 10 years ago. And Unmetric's journey was from a bedroom in Chennai in India to a boardroom in Copenhagen. We were acquired by a Danish company that was acquired by a US company that was acquired by a private equity firm. So that journey complete, I just decided to step back and take some time off and focus on personal growth and also on the family and stuff. And that was a time when I'd run out of excuses for writing the book, because the ideas in the book have been something I've been jotting down on many flights and things for years. And I sat down and wrote most of it through the latter half of 2020. Now, while I had the ideas, I didn't know how to write a book. How do you edit a book? How do you market a book? How do you get Amazon to give visibility to your book? So a whole bunch of things that I needed to learn. And latter half of 2020 was I signed up for a bunch of courses on on exactly those, how to write a book, how to edit a book. And these were delivered on Facebook Live, on Zoom, on YouTube Live. Class sizes were as little as 10 students to as much as 1,200 students in the case of the Amazon marketing course. So I ended up attending 56 live streams across 6 different courses that I had signed up for and paid for on how to write, edit, market, and list a book. And across these, so what happened was I ended up attending these 56 live streams in a compressed period of about 3 months, which is beautiful because then you get to see patterns. And I saw a few consistent patterns. First, the worst speakers were the ones who would only speak in a live stream, say in a Zoom session, and not ask their audience anything. You have an excuse for doing it when you're talking off stage, but even a good speaker on stage, and this, would ask the audience questions, ask them to raise their hands, ask them to do some things, keep it interactive, right? There's no excuse for not keeping it interactive in an online session, but the worst ones are the ones who do that. The better ones would ask the audience questions, but they would ignore the answers. So they would ask the audience basic questions like, hey, where are you joining us from? Put it in the chat. And then 200 people would type their location on the chat very, very enthusiastically, and 3 of them would be called out, and the remaining 197 people would be summarily ignored, like they didn't exist and their answers didn't matter, which is fine because if the presenter went through all 200 locations, he would sound like a geography teacher, and he would probably take the next 10 minutes sounding like that, and you don't want to do that. But think about it, Roy. It's not normal, right? You wouldn't ask me a question and then ignore my answer altogether. That would be pretty rude. But we do that on a live stream scenario because there's no better way. I mean, how can you ask 200 people a question and acknowledge their answer, right? Or you might ask people like, okay, folks, what is one important quality? I know you teach podcasting, right? So you might say, okay, what is the most important technical thing that you think a podcaster should be aware of? Or what is one quality that every good podcaster needs to have? Put it in the chat. And then 200 people are saying, voice modulation or this or that. I'm making stuff up, so please excuse my ignorance on this, but people are answering. But again, you might read out 2 or 3 people and then you'll ignore the remaining ones of them. So I noticed this time and again. In certain cases, the presenter might say, hey, here's a link, please go to this link and participate to answer this poll at this link or something like that. And then 2 things happen. First is it's a fractured experience because the audience is leaving that live stream. So I'm not looking at your face anymore. I'm going to my Chrome browser. I open it, and then there's a piece of news, and then there's a picture of a cat and a picture of a dog. And guess what? I've forgotten you altogether. I've moved on to something else, right? Or worse still, you put the link on the Zoom chat, and then people are typing something or the other, and some people understood the instructions, most people didn't understand the instructions. So you say, go to this link and type your answer, and everybody is typing the answer here, and pretty soon the link is buried up there, and someone is saying, what link? I can't see any link. And then everybody is typing the answer here, and it's total chaos. So I saw these repeated again and again, and it was very obvious something is broken, right? Because the second thing about sending people to a link is like me meeting you at a conference and asking you a question, and you're about to answer me, and I say, no, hang on, Roy. There's a box outside there next to the ladies' bathroom. Can you put your answer over there and come back here and continue the conversation? You're not going to come back and continue the conversation, right? But that's kind of what we're doing in live streams. We're doing that on Zoom. We're doing that on YouTube Live. We're doing it in webinars, and it's a crying shame because we felt, and this is where the connective tissue from our previous experience at Unmetric helped, because over there we used to try and figure out insights from unstructured data. So I thought there could be something interesting that we could do over here, and happy to dive into how we do it and what we do. But that's exactly what we solve at Stream Alive. We make a live stream alive. We allow a presenter like you, who's doing it every Tuesday and Thursday and streaming with an audience, to allow the audience to participate, to have a voice, and to give a visual face to that voice in real time, and make the entire thing, kind of change it from a monologue into a dialogue, right? From a very autocratic process into a very democratic process, from stand-up comedy to improv comedy, to make it one where the audience is actually involved. And that's kind of what we do at Stream Alive.
Oh, excellent. And like, because I've seen some of the stuff, and I've looked at one of the things that I thought was brilliant, because you mentioned where do you come from, and you've got the map, and it's showing the map, so then you can zoom in and go, oh, we've got a load of people from Europe, say, let's say it's an international thing. That's very clever. Like, I thought, wow, that's a brilliant way of doing it, because even if you don't get to call them out, the person sees their little dot appearing and they feel kind of heard.
You said everything, and thank you so much, one, for I'm torn between being worried and being super impressed with all your research and homework. It looks like you checked out everything that we do at Stream Alive and all of that, so thank you for that. But that map is something we're especially proud about, because that's the classic icebreaker question, right? What's the first thing you and I spoke when we got onto the conversation? I told you where I'm based and where I'm from, and you did the same thing, right? I mean, you're in Poland, you're from Ireland, I'm from India, I'm here in the States. It's very natural for us as a species to geo-identify ourselves. And it's funny, even if the presenter doesn't ask, people often start with, hey, hello from, from New York City, hello from Miami, hello from London, and so on and so forth. So what we do over there is, that's an interesting thing. In the beginning, you're not going to have people saying, I just had a burrito for breakfast. Right? You are going to have people saying a certain thing. So there is context to conversations. It's not as random as we like to think. Especially when the presenter asks, where are you joining from? People are going to be answering with a location mentioned somewhere. So what we've built is the ability, once you've connected Stream Alive to your Zoom or to your YouTube, it's reading the chat in real time. So if people are responding with a location, it's going to map that out on a world map with, giving a microsecond of acknowledgement to each person, showing their name for a second, saying Roy is joining us from Poland, Lux is joining us from New Jersey. So I feel included, I feel acknowledged, which is powerful because I'm not ignored anymore. And there's a little dot in the map to represent that I'm there. So here's the interesting thing that happened, and you just mentioned it about being included, right? when I was asked, where are you joining from, in all those 56 live streams that I joined, I responded the first 3 times and didn't respond for the next 53 times, because who cares? And who gives a damn where I'm from, right? But over here, if I saw the US map, for example, lighting up on the West Coast and looking very naked around New York City, I almost feel obligated to register my presence, because it's not going to be ignored. It's going to translate into a little dot saying Lux is here. He matters. He's here. Right. I feel like I need to hold the flag for where I am, because otherwise it's empty in the map. So people respond a lot more. It's amazing. You ask a question, connect, stream a live show, visualization, zook, it just jumps up.
And with that, because sometimes there's guys that will name all the different places that are, and for me, as engaging or learning from somebody like the courses you've signed up, it can be boring as well. But with that, it's entertaining and you're kind of curious, because you know it's not a case of looking just someone typing Sydney, New Zealand, blah blah blah. You're looking at the map, and we're all familiar with the map, and I think it's a way better way of engaging, which in turn makes me more focused in for the future of whatever the guy is saying.
That's exactly the hope. I couldn't have put it better. But here's a funny thing. We thought putting it on a map would reduce the amount of time, because if you had to acknowledge each person and read out their place, unless you're Eminem or a rapper, you can't do it really fast. So the map allows you to do it. But here's a funny thing: we're finding a lot of YouTubers now actually spending time on the map. They're literally flying over countries. They're zooming in, saying, "Oh, we have a lot of people from the southeast coast of India. We got a lot of people from Singapore. We got people from Australia. Let's look at where they are in Australia." So it's almost become like a conversation between the audience collectively and the speaker. So although the objective was to compress time, it is actually expanding for some speakers who love to spend time on it, fly around the map, zoom in, zoom out, pan and zoom. It's beautiful, and that's the way we think of it. We think of Stream Alive as, and the map is just one example. Just like you have templates in PowerPoint, which says either put bullet slides, bullet points, or put a picture and a video, or put a video. We are creating templates for audience interactions, because we believe that the best speakers are the ones who don't just love the sound of their own voice, but give the audience a voice as well. Right? The best speakers are the best listeners. So we're giving a whole bunch of templates for speakers to allow their audience to give responses and to visualize those responses. So you picked on the map, and you might have seen the other ones we have as well. So for
I same one
example,
when, for example, you asked a question and it looks like it's interactive as well, because most of the ones that I've seen with that is you don't see what's going on. You're waiting and you're bored and you're going away and you're looking at your Facebook or whatever. And then all of a sudden they show you, yeah, 3% said this. But your one seems to be moving, which means I'm not going to, I'm going to stay focused looking at this.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is the exact objective there, saying right now the current approach is one where you ask people to go to a third party website, participate, and then you wait for all the responses, and then you say, okay guys, you spent the last 2 minutes responding, here's a summary of what you did. Right now, if you think about it, people can see the responses. I mean, why not show it to them in real time? So if you do a poll, ask people, and you have 4 options, simply ask people to type 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat, and in real time they're going to see the poll bars dance against each other. So we did this one show where we had a beatboxer who could do any genre of music, and she asked the audience, okay, which of these 6 genres do you want? Number 1 was rock, 2 was jazz, 3 was hip hop, 4 was something else. And it was like a battle between the guys who wanted rock and the guys who wanted jazz. Spoiler alert, rock won finally, thank God. But it was beautiful, just to see the bars dance against each other. Is the same joy you feel when you watch a 100-meter sprint, or a horse race, or a Formula One, where you're seeing things dance and you're seeing what's going to come out in front. Why not make the audience a part of the process? So that's also part of our philosophy of inclusivity, where instead of letting the audience give your responses, I'll tell you what you said at the end. Give your responses, let everybody see everyone's responses, and let's collectively see where we're going to end up, right? So let's co-create this, as opposed to I'm going to make this and show it to you at the end. Again, that's very autocratic in our opinion. We want to make it democratic.
Brilliant. And regarding then where you're streaming, because you mentioned Zoom, so you can do it on the Zoom, which we do like all our calls. Well, I mean, it's either the StreamYard or the Zoom, but I personally had been using Zoom for years. I'm very comfortable with Zoom. It's never let me down, basically. Other stuff has left me down. So you can interact with that and then go to, I know, YouTube, but what other platforms are you able to, like Facebook, Twitter, are you able to do them ones?
Down the line, we should be doing Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, Twitch, and literally every single major live streaming platform known to man. At this point, we support YouTube Live. You're absolutely right. We support Zoom. And in Zoom, we support Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars. And we also support Microsoft Teams. So the way we look at it, that way, whether you're a preacher, teacher, seller, or an entertainer on YouTube, or if you're an internal company things where you're using Zoom or Teams and you want to use it for meetings, trainings, town halls, all hands, we kind of address all of those use cases. Since our approach is one where we don't ask people to go to the product, but I brought the product to the people, we need to natively integrate with every single platform so that people can interact through the native chat. So on the Zoom chat, if I was running Streamer Live right now, you don't need to go to a third-party chat. You just use a Zoom chat. That's the beauty of the platform. The tough part is, therefore, we need to engineer it separately for each and every platform. And it's a different approach for each one. It's an API for YouTube. It's a bot for Zoom. So it's different engineering for each platform that we work, which is why it's not a simple switching on. And at this point, we support these three. But when we speak again in a few months, I'm hoping that that list has more than doubled.
Brilliant, brilliant. And just curious if, for example, like in our situation, sometimes there's up to 5 podcasters. Are you able to just post to one YouTube, or can you actually have multiple accounts that it could go out to, the 5 YouTube channels?
At this point, it is one YouTube channel per account. But if you want a second one, you got to create a second account. And in fact, the product is actually absolutely free right now. And even when we start charging, we will still have a free plan. So if you had multiple accounts, you just need to sign up for multiple email IDs on the platform and use each one with one. Down the line, we might support one to many if there's a lot of use cases for that. At this point, we're finding more often than not, a lot of folks have one primary channel that you're focusing on, and they're okay with this. So that's kind of how it works right now. Mm-hmm. We're focusing a lot of our efforts on expanding that library of interactions, right? So we talked about the polls, we talked about the maps. There's so many things you can do. I'll just give you one or two examples if that's okay. Is that
of course? Yeah.
So one is a word cloud. Very, very basic, but imagine asking people that question we talked about earlier. What's the most important quality you think a podcaster needs to have? And you might have answers as much as patience, listening, empathy, great mic. It might be all over the place, right? So imagine all of those answers as people are typing them, populating into a word cloud, and someone sees empathy and says, yeah, empathy. And he types empathy, and the empathy becomes a little bit bigger, right? So the words dance against each other.
And this would be like similar to what you've done on your TED speech, where you've got the word bubble of the words that people were mentioning, and that's what they're kind of seeing, yeah?
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I think I've had an obsession with word clouds and word bubbles for a very long time. I didn't realize it till you pointed it out that way. But yes, absolutely. I think it's very, very similar, because visualizing responses or visualizing words as opposed to looking at them linearly allows you to figure out patterns that you might have missed otherwise, right?
And because I've even kind of at one stage there was I don't know what app or some program I was able to do earphones, and I used Podcaster. Is it something that is a certain shape, or is it something that maybe you're able to do now, or if in the future that you can create the shape? So for example, if it was a podcasting question, it could be either a microphone and earphones. If it was something to do with newspapers, it could be the shape of news, whatever.
Are you sitting on our product meetings by any chance, or absolutely? Down the line, we hope to have a visual mask to the word clouds. Right now, it's a boring rectangle, but it's still a lot more interesting by orders of magnitude from the current practice, which is nothing. So down the line, absolutely, I think we need to give people the ability to make it their own, which is, adding your logo, adding something that is symbolic of your industry, like a headphone, like you mentioned, if you're a podcaster, or a newspaper, if you're a newspaper, or whatever, and giving it your own visual signature. We're a little far away from that, because that would mean changing the libraries from the ones that we currently use, but that's a direction we hope to go down, because in the technology space, the more you allow people to make a product their own, to individualize it, the more sticky it becomes, right? So we certainly want to go down that direction for all those reasons. Plus, it looks more visually appealing if the words come like a headphone instead of coming like a rectangle. But at this point, we're building a whole bunch of interactions. Like I'll tell you one of them, two of them, which I'm particularly thrilled about. One is called Transient Thoughts, which simply allows people, as different comments come in. Word clouds are great for short form text, for one word answers and two word answers. But imagine if you had to ask people for a sentence long answer. That would look pretty weird in a word cloud. But you want to make that like almost like thoughts that are happening in space around you. So a bubble comes up with one person's answer, then the next person, then the third one. It's almost like you're sitting in a room and you're seeing people come up with these thought bubbles, and it's transient because one person speaks, then the next one. So again, it's as simple as giving visual real estate to people's thoughts and contributions, which is so powerful because for the first
Absolutely.
time you're listening to them. And you can also incentivize it. So we have something called Jumping Jackpot that we're working on next, which is inspired by the Vegas jackpots, very obviously. But anyone who's commented, imagine anyone who's commented has essentially gotten a free ticket to get into the jackpot. And all those names of people who've commented in the last 30 minutes is spun around a jackpot. And finally, it spins and it ends with Roy. And Roy gets maybe a half-hour consulting session on making his podcast, or he gets some free swag. But you're gamifying it, you're making it interesting. Everyone's looking at that jackpot to see where it's going to
I
stop,
mean,
who's going
as
to
you're
win
telling
this,
me
right?
that now, because I'm launching a course and I'm thinking if, because I have a recorded webinar, but I mean, I'm thinking I know that the advantage of doing a live one, but you can basically say 50% off will be for somebody or whatever. And straight away, people will be engaging. And that is excellent. I love that. Yeah.
Totally.
Brilliant.
And by the way, side note, whenever you're doing that, and I know you said you're taking a break from your live stream, but whenever you restart, happy to have a conversation. I think if your podcasts are anything to go by, I can imagine how engaging your webinars are and how much more engaging they're going to be with Streamer Live. So happy to speak about that. I mean, our focus, and you alluded to it, Roy, is to help presenters, track, increase, and convert engagement. Right. So there's a whole analytics module at the end of the product that allows you to look back and say, okay, when were the spikes? Who was the most engaged person? When I asked that question saying, when are you planning to start your podcast? Who are the 10 people who said next month? Because I'm not currently interested in the guy who said next year or don't know when. Right. So people reveal intent a lot in conversations, and you make them freewheeling. So how do you mine that intent in interesting ways? How do you track that engagement? How do you figure out what worked and what didn't, so that you can make your next live stream even more engaging? I think all of this flows from some of those speaking experiences, because you talked about it. It's funnily enough right in the beginning, where you talked about in stand-up comedy waiting for the audience to laugh. You just realize over more and more speaking engagements that it's not just about what you're speaking, but it's about listening. And I think Stream Alive is now entirely focused on that listening part, and that's why I'm super excited about it. Right?
No,
The more we
I'm
dive this, we show it to people, they come up with ideas, they say, can you build this, can you do this, can you do that? Right now we have our roadmap being written by some of our beta users who are giving us phenomenal feedback. Jumping Jackpot came out of a conversation like this. Someone said, can you allow me to give a prize to somebody who's commented? Right now I had to manually put their names in a wheel. Instead, can you automatically pull it? We said, yes, we can. Yeah. Yeah,
brilliant.
so pretty excited about this. Nothing exists like it. We filed patents for what we built. We've been very quiet for the last year in terms of fine-tuning things and making sure everything works as it's supposed to. So it's been over a year in the making. We've been beta testing with a lot of people. And right now we're ready to show it to the world.
Well, I've used two other ones, and to be honest with you, I've stopped using them because I didn't think they were serving me well. And from what I've looked at your stuff, and the fact that you're kind of just getting, you're just coming out of you mentioned the horse racing, you're just coming out of the whatever that you call where they're starting the starting race, let's say, and I'd say it's going to be 100 times even better in a few years' time. Like, so I'm definitely going to get involved, and I'm looking forward to the journey actually.
Thank you. I look forward to it. I would love that.
Brilliant. So listen, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know how they can get in contact with you.
Totally. So I'm easy to find. My name is Lakshmanan Narayan, but Lakshmanan is pronounced in 18 different ways here in the States. Everyone calls me Lux Narayan. So luxnarayan.com is the best way because that has links to all my other profiles on LinkedIn and other places too. And for Stream Alive, which, like I said, is my newest and most demanding baby, it's streamalive.com. So streamalive.com. So streamalive.com, luxnarayan.com, and look forward to staying in touch.
Oh, excellent. I'll make sure I put the links both on the audio and the video. Thank you
Appreciate
very
that.
much.
Thank you.
So
Thank you,
that's-
Roy. This was fun.
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. As mentioned, you'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com or on BitChute and YouTube. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and be sure to check out Stream Alive. Until next week, take care.